To us, magic sounds like this extraordinary thing, pulling a rabbit out of the hat, coming out of nowhere. But it's here, it's real, and the more that we are open to the unseen, to the energies of this world, to abundance and manifesting, to calling in and growing, the more we'll be able to call magic into our lives. Join me as I share stories, wisdom, and curiosity around connecting with your higher frequency, tapping into the synchronicities of the universe, and opening up to the unseen possibilities that this world has to offer. I am your host, Dayna Faye, and this is the Ordinary Magic Podcast. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Ordinary Magic Podcast. I am your host, Dayna, and as I continue to teach and talk about human design on this podcast, I want to also shed light on the areas of conditioning that a lot of us have experienced. Your human design chart can give you incredible insight into who you are and what your soul came here to express. And one of the main goals of this tool is to help us navigate this time where we get to move from a very homogenized culture and world and start to decondition. It's my belief that having awareness of where you have been conditioned is one of the first steps of the deconditioning process. So today I would like to talk about the topic of people pleasing. How does one become a people pleaser? Where does it stem from? And how do we step out of that pattern? I am so honored to bring on therapist and intuitive Nadia Last to help explain just that. Nadia is an associate marriage and family therapist based in Northern California. She uses humanistic therapy, emotionally focused therapy, parts work, and human design as part of her practice. I am honored to say she is a dear friend of mine, and she is one of my human design teachers, along with Samantha Fotenhauer from the Moonrise community. Welcome to the podcast, Nadia. I'm so grateful and honored to have you here.
Oh, Dayna, thank you so much. And it was a surreal experience to hear you say Moonrise Community out loud because we just launched it like a month and a half ago. So it's a joy to be here and talk about the intersection of therapeutic work and human design.
Absolutely. And just to give the listeners some insight into the process, because if they look up the Moonrise community or your Instagram, they may say, wow, Nadia's got it all together. She's a therapist. She's got her Moonrise community. She runs psychedelic retreats. But I met Nadia in, 2020. I found you on Instagram and my sacral motor was lit. I had been looking for literally a coach or a therapist, but they needed to know human design. And I was waiting. I was like a year into asking coaches, hey, do you know anything about human design? And they were like, nope. And I was like, next. I found you on Instagram. You're interviewing somebody. And I just felt this yes in my body. I have to reach out to this person. And I did, found out you were a coach. We started working together in early January of 2021. And at the time, we were working through some things, and I actually became newly pregnant. I was quite sick. I had asked, Nadia, can you just coach me and teach me human design as well? And you did, and you said, this is really awesome because I'm thinking about teaching human design to other people who want to become readers. And that was just the seed that you planted. It was another 3 years because it was 2022, I think, when you and Sam launched your first HDT. And you guys, so it's called Human Design Training, and you guys ran that for 2 years. And now you've created this beautiful community called Moonrise to really put a bow on it.
Totally. I couldn't have said it better. And I think this is what's so powerful about tracing your steps with people that you've known in your life, because I feel deeply moved remembering that I reached out to that person to interview her. Her name was Jazz the Moon Mother, because my friend who is a manifester sent me her profile and it's like, this person's amazing in human design. You should reach out to her. And I did. And I was like, hey, would you be willing to do an Instagram live? Could I interview you? And she agreed. And that's how you found me. And that same manifester friend is the one that introduced me and Sam. So it's like, it's really cool. And I think kind of a tangent, but just a quick point for people to remember, because I'm remembering this over and over in my life, that your brain likes to make plans. But actually, if you just let the currents of your life take you along, all the synchronicities will happen exactly as they're meant to. And looking back, it will always make sense.
Yes, yes. And if you would like to hear more about those currents, Nadia's podcast is called The Current. And you have some beautiful episodes on that about aligning yourself with that energy. Okay, so one thing you said in there, Nadia, was that you were invited by your manifestor friend to reach out to that woman. And you are a projector energy type. So did you consider that an invitation to technically initiate?
Yes, I definitely considered it an invitation. And as I started contemplating and sitting with my energy, my human design energy, so much of my life started to make sense. As a projector, you're designed to see and to guide people, but you can't be everyone's teacher. People have to see you and invite you in, which is exactly what you did, Dayna, which is so perfect. And you had a sacral response, which is how you move through the world. And so, really, the best things in my life have happened when people see me and they're like, hey, I have an opportunity for you. Sam reached out to me after we were introduced and was like, would you want to start a spiritual community together? That was like 3 years ago. And so it took us this long to finally launch it, but it all makes sense and perfect timing. And honestly, Dayna, how I feel right now is a little bit like a manifesting generator. I have so many different offshoots that are happening. You mentioned the retreats I do. I have my own podcast. I have Moonrise. I have my therapy practice. I have so much happening in my own personal life. And it feels beautiful, but I am getting the call right now to simplify and to streamline. So I'm not quite sure where that will lead me, but it does feel a little bit like splatter paint right now. And I'm being called to cull it down a little bit. And my true love is therapy and how human design layers into therapy.
That's so beautiful. And I actually wanted to ask you about that because you actually have a very similar chart as Nicole Doyle, who I just had on episode 28. You guys have the same centers defined as a projector. And I want to make sure when I'm doing readings for projectors that I'm really empowering them when they hear that, oh, you're not really supposed to work more than 3 hours a day. And for projectors who are following what society tells us to do, they are working 8 hours a day, if not more. So how have you navigated that with your projector energy?
It's such a good question. And I think that it really is about energy management. Like you can have a lot of output, but where do you bake in that rest time? And so listening to my body, maybe I booked a workout class in the morning, but I'm really feeling like I want to sleep in because I worked a little bit later than I anticipated last night. Or when I do retreats, for instance, that's a lot of continuous output. I know to take at least a day of work off on the other side of it. Like you will have a deficit in your energy if you just keep pushing, 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 pushing. So it's more about, I almost think of it as like having little snacks with you whenever you get hungry or cranky, like as emergencies. It's like as a projector, just always building in little pockets of rest. Otherwise, you're going to feel like a toddler that just had a sleepover and is completely melting down in the middle of the grocery store.
Yeah, that's a beautiful. I picture that that Snickers commercial where they're like, "Grab a Snickers bar."
Yes. Yes. Like rest, manifestors, reflectors, projectors. I think that all types deserve rest, of course, but it's just knowing your limits because you are more prone than other types to push beyond what is actually healthy for your body.
I cannot wait for human design to become even more mainstream and for people to really allow themselves to rest and for there to be no shame around that. And in fact, for people to feel empowered that because they rested, their creative time, their work time is just that much better.
Yes. But I think rest, this is so interesting, Dayna, because I've been thinking about this a lot that we guilt ourselves. So sometimes we're like, okay, I'm resting, but you feel bad the whole time so that you didn't actually sink into that like Shavasana style, full body immersive rest, or you're mindlessly scrolling. You're like, I'm resting, but I'm actually like continuing to inundate myself with screen time so that it wasn't actually recharging.
So your mental body really wasn't resting during
100%. Time. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point that we actually need to learn again how to actually rest.
Yes. Even just now, I had a harmonium lesson. If you've ever seen, for those listening, like the little wooden box they sometimes bring out at the end of yoga classes, that is part like accordion bellow and part piano. So I started learning that a year and a half ago, and I have a teacher, and we just sang together for the last hour. And yes, I was outputting, but it felt like rest because it was just, I sense afterward my battery is replenished. I have more energy to go back into my workday. And that was a harmonium lesson I took at 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So just giving yourself some push pull and flowing with it.
So all energy types, but especially the manifestors, projectors, and reflectors. Think of those types of things, your harmoniums. What is it that you do that can even be an active rest that totally like refuels your fire?
So well said.
I love it. Okay, let's get into the topic of people pleasing. This is something I've wanted to unpack for a while. And back in 2021, when we did coaching together, you really helped me understand my totally open heart center and that I was conditioned to feel like I had something to prove, and that receiving a lot of external validation when I was younger. I'm also a 2-line. I'm kind of a novice at many things. And so I have some natural abilities, I would say. And so I would get praise as a child. And I feel like I unconsciously turned into a people pleaser. And I think there's probably a range of what it means to be a people pleaser. So I'm excited to get your personal view on it and also your therapeutic lens on it. So what would be your definition of people pleasing?
So you mentioned two facets here already. So the need and the desire for external validation and people pleasing. And I would say that the distinction between those two, the external validation is the desire to receive, basically. Whereas people pleasing can sometimes actually be almost like hypervigilance, managing other people. It's really focused externally on the people around and saying, how can I make sure when I walk into a room that I'm balancing the moods that are present here, that I'm making sure that I buoy people when I feel that it's basically tiptoeing. It's learning how to contort oneself in order to keep the peace or to keep people at a certain level of normalcy. From an emotional standpoint, maybe somebody is really explosive with their anger. Maybe there's so many different ways that people pleasing can happen, but it usually stems from a childhood in which a child learns, I need to manage the people around me. And so the only thing that I can control in this out of control environment is my own behavior. And I've learned to make myself smaller, to make my needs less present so that other people are not as reactive.
I'm just taking in everything you said because what's so fascinating is my understanding is most of our programming happens before the age of 7 years old as a child. And I don't have a lot of memories from being that young, but yet that's when we're programmed to keep the peace, to manage the energy, to change maybe our authentic expressions that we needed to express in order to kind of soothe the environment. It sounds very intuitive to me.
Yes. Yeah. Say a little bit more about what you mean by intuitive.
I had this epiphany recently as I'm working through a mediumship and my psychic abilities are coming more online, that perhaps as a young child, I actually had those very naturally. And I was doing psychic work without realizing it. I was doing energy work. And I used to, in my earlier 20s, when I was in the fitness industry, I used to say, my talent is matching other people's energy and making them feel better. And I would get home at the end of the night completely exhausted and depleted. Or when I managed a cafe, and there's that gray line again, like the hospitality industry, at least how I was taught in the Midwest, a lot of Midwest nice here, is like, hi, how's it going? But also like I remembered what people did the weekend before. I made them feel good. I listened. So I was doing a lot of energy work, I think, without realizing it. Would you validate that?
Oh my God, so much so. I actually think that a lot of people listening will feel very seen by recognizing, whoa, I've been open and empathic and intuitive for a very long time, but it got out of hand. And as you're talking about the Midwest nice, which I'm from Michigan, so we have that in common, Dayna. It's the best, Midwest.
Woo-woo.
But I'm actually thinking of like people pleasing a little bit like hospitality. If you are really good at hospitality, if you're working at a hotel, for instance, and it's really, really great customer service, you basically make yourself and your needs invisible. And your job is making sure that the customer is always right and that they're always happy. And that is how people pleasing will often manifest is I've completely lost track of what I want, what I need in order to make sure that I'm keeping the peace or making this person as comfortable as possible.
Hmm. Wow. So, what is your own experience with people pleasing?
I grew up in a household that was really non-confrontational, meaning there were some pretty dysfunctional patterns that were present in my family, in my immediate family, but we never spoke about them. And I am able to talk about this freely because my dad was actually on my podcast and he's really open and generous with his story from addiction to recovery. It was like a generationally inherited addiction line. So I don't need to get into as many of the details here, but you can go back and listen to that if that speaks to you. But basically my dad was an addict and no one ever said anything. And so I learned from a young age, like you don't say the things that are really hard. If there's like a glaring elephant in the room, you basically like turn your face to ignore it. And it was really interesting that that kind of manifested in so much of my life. So, I was an A+ student. I was like a teacher's pet. I would sit at the front of the school bus and give my school bus drivers directions when I was little. I was so easy to like please the adults in my life. And I felt like this legacy of secrecy that I carried ended up manifesting a bit into people pleasing. And then I got into the corporate world and I was working in a very intense and competitive environment. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, there was all these opportunities for people to just say the direct thing because it was business. It was no longer personal. And so all that time in my life was so intense. It was very like counter. I also have an open heart in human design. I was like, whoa, I'm not quite built for this. I knew that. It was also so healing for me. I remember there was this moment when I was in a meeting and someone kind of threw me under the bus. It was a peer and I really didn't feel good. And I felt like really put on blast. And as soon as the meeting was over, I turned to this person. I was like, hey, can you stay for a minute in this room so we can talk? And I felt this power in my voice where it's like, I am no longer catering to other people's emotions. I'm not going to make myself smaller. And the person stayed and we had this conversation where I was like, hey, the way you just spoke about me really made me feel bad. And I just want to have an open conversation here. Like, what was happening for you in that moment? And that was a huge turning point for me, where I was like, hard conversations actually lead to me feeling less resentful, less bitter as a projector, more empowered, and into the outcomes that I actually want. Like, if my family of origin had actually talked about these really challenging issues, how different would our trajectory have been?
I have a very similar family origin story in that regard, which I feel like has led me towards a little bit of that. I mean, is that also connected, the avoidant attachment style?
I would say that there's certainly cousins, if not, close cousins, maybe distant cousins, but there's overlapping tendencies of if you feel like your attachment isn't secure to someone or to your family, then anything could be threatening. So talking about the really hard thing, the fear of the avoidant attachment is they will leave or I will blow this thing up. And so having the confrontation is not worth the fear or the risk of losing.
Yeah, it doesn't feel safe. So you had that hard conversation with that person. And it sounds like that was kind of a turning point for you. Did you do any other personal work around people pleasing to transmute that? Like, are you 100% not a people pleaser now?
No, I wish that was the case. It will be a lifelong thing that I carry, as is many of the things that were conditioned in us before we were 7 years old, as you're talking about, Dayna. So I know this about myself. This is a growing edge for me, but I am growing my capacity. There are still conversations that I need to have with close friends right now, where I'm like, I know this is a conversation I need to have, but I'm sitting on it. I've been journaling about it. And even recording this right now, I'm like, I got to say what I need to say, which is a John Mayer song. But I feel like I'm able to empathize with my clients so much in this regard, because where you can start if you're not ready to have the conversation with someone, it sounds cheesy, but simply saying it out loud to an empty chair really unstucks what needs to be said. So, for instance, I have a friend who doesn't invite me to something and it's really painful, but I don't want to, seem really vulnerable. So I don't want to say anything to them, but it really is sticking with me. And I know because I'm ruminating over the next 3 days. If I just sit in my room and talk to the person, if they're there, like, I can't believe you acted this way. It feels so frustrating to me. These are my feelings, et cetera, et cetera. Even if you never have that conversation with someone, what you're getting clear with is where your needs were compromised. And your sense of self is strengthened through the exercise. So I'm saying this because as a therapist, so much of my work is talk to the person as if they're here right now And usually my client will get really nervous, like there's a frog in their throat, because it's so hard to say the thing, to say how we were hurt, to say where boundaries need to be set. And yet as they start to say it, it starts to free their voice up and they start to feel more clear and centered in themselves again.
They're opening up their throat chakra more, which
hell yes.
I was listening to one of our old coaching calls right before this session today, and I got really emotional. I started crying because I was like, oh my God, Nadia, you were my first one-on-one coach. You helped me open my throat chakra, because it had been closed due to feeling not safe. And in that session, we actually talked about when my father was in hospice, and I held the pose. I watched all our loved ones come through the room for 4 days and pour their heart out to him, but I was strong. I just stood there, and that's such a regret that I have to this day, and I've worked through it over and over again, but that's part of that. Well, this is my job, is to do this keep the peace work that I never even consciously agreed to.
So if you want to share, Dayna, I'm curious, reflecting now, how that started, how that role was one that you felt you needed to assume in that moment.
I think it's multifaceted. I think part of it is, same as you. My family didn't talk about vulnerable things. We didn't emote. We were just happy or hardworking, or just otherwise go rest, go to your room, that type of thing. And I also lived in a community that made me feel like you weren't cool unless you were a tomboy, strong, tough, farm kid, country girl, things like that. So by the time I was 25 and watching my father pass away, and even though him getting sick and being sick for 7 years really did bring a gift to our family, we did get a little bit closer and a little more vulnerable with each other, but not to the extent of laying with him, holding him, crying to him, telling him that I love him, all those things. Like, that's just not something we ever did. That was very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just like so deeply with little Dayna and your family. And I would say that like people pleasing stems from, as all mental health disorders or dysfunctional behavior stems from, is a lack of love or a distortion of love. So in your family, maybe what we would say is the story that you received or you heard or you understood is, I am loved when I am strong. I am loved when I'm happy. And that's a narrative that many children receive subliminally or just like directly. They're told, like, go to your room when you have a meltdown, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are all hardwired to receive love. And if we can only receive love and peace when we act in certain ways, that's where people pleasing starts.
So simple.
Simple.
So hard to unwind once you've been through that experience.
Totally. Yeah.
So what would you suggest? A lot of people who are listening are parents. I have a 2-year-old. I'm trying to undo that. I'm trying to hold space for her emotions, as well as being her guide and having boundaries. What would you suggest? Like, for example, when she does something cool or good and we say, good job, oh my gosh, good job, and we're clapping and she's getting all this external validation, I find myself swinging the pendulum from one way to the other, like totally being not how my parents raised me, and then being like, oh my gosh, that was too much, I need to bring it back. Like,
yes.
From a therapeutic lens, what do we do as parents?
It's such a good question. And I'm not a parent myself, but I did work at an elementary school this last year as my grad school internship. So I spent a lot of time with this question, and how it is basically being taught in schools with little ones is make your praise specific. Instead of just saying good job, or like, you can still get excited about the things that they do, but also praising times that they fail, for instance. Like, what are you praising? You did such a great job trying today. Like, you look at you, like you are trying to tie your shoes. That is amazing. Like, look at you. You were so resilient, or you really allowed yourself to feel big feelings today. And I'm proud of you for making space for them. There's so many different examples of this. I know eating is a really big struggle for parents. Oftentimes our parents' generation are like, you eat what's on the plate. I made it for you, and you will not leave the table until you finish your food. And so much of parenting today is like, I'm really proud of you that you even like held the broccoli, or that you took the broccoli and you put it to your tongue, or you like, there's so many different ways and recognition of progress, and helping children realize that you don't just get praise when you do something quote unquote right. You get praise for all different sorts of qualities, being attentive to other people, sharing, trying, and then getting back up again. And I'm wondering if this brings up anything for you, Dayna.
Yeah, actually, this past weekend, I had just gotten a new bike with a toddler seat on it. And with the kickstand up, the bike looks very tippy compared to the bike Mia is used to. And she was like, I am not going on that. That is not safe, you know? And it took me 2 weeks of this bike sitting in our living room and me telling her every day, okay, in a few days, we're going to go bike to the coffee shop. It's going to be safe. You're safe when you're with mama, you know, things like that. I didn't want to force her, and I didn't want to give in and not encourage her and pressure her a little bit to be like, face your fears, you know, and like try to educate her that she's safe. And so this Sunday, I was like, we're going to go to the coffee shop. She was like, no, absolutely not. You know, she was still in her pajamas. She wouldn't get ready for it. It wasn't happening. And I forgot what I did, but I basically moved to the bike. I think I packed some muffins. She got a little bit excited and I said, Mia, can you just trust me that you are safe with me? And I promise nothing is going to happen to you. And I just saw it in her eyes, like something changed, and she was willing. So I didn't even worry about changing her clothes. I was like, let's go. So in her pajamas, we got outside and I talked her through while I was putting her on, you know, it's going to be a little tippy while it gets you on. We are going to go over bumps. Sure enough, we did it. We biked to the coffee shop and she had so much fun. So I feel like actually, for her age, I mean, 2.5, she is way smarter than I ever realized kids are at that age. She can really, really understand me. And so I talk to her almost like an adult, you know, that just needs that little bit of encouragement. And then afterwards, I just kept asking her about, how was that? Was that fun? Wasn't it cool that we were safe, you know, and that I'm going to keep you safe every time you're on that bike? And now she trusts me. And I also talked to her about facing her fears, that she did something that was scary, and I was proud of her.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really cool. And also there's an opportunity also for you to praise, like, I see how attentive you are. I see that you noticed that the bike was a bit tippy, that you are very aware of your surroundings. I'm really proud of you for working to keep yourself safe as well. And even though that you're safe in this scenario, like, I think it's really amazing that you're starting to see how things change and how to take caution when you need to.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'm going to note that down because I need to use those, because if you were like a fly on the wall here, when I get her dressed in the morning and I think she looks like the most beautiful girl in the world, I'm like, you're so beautiful and you're smart and you're talented and you're like, I'm like trying to like undo what, you know, I didn't get a lot of you're smart when I was younger. So then I start thinking of all the things and just like spat them out at her.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, it's like, it's so interesting, the different affirmations. And again, I'm not a parent yet, but I'm sure it's going to be so humbling, because there's this thing that basically happens. There's these mirror neurons that fire when we see someone do something. It's like a parent waves and the child waves. A parent laughs and the child laughs. Like, we are programmed to see something modeled and repeat it. And so what happens when we become parents is, even without realizing it, we took in so much from our parents that's just being like fired, these mirror neurons. So to be able to bring this much mindfulness and intentionality into just figuring out what you want to carry forward is amazing, Dayna. You're crushing it.
Well, thank you. And all parents are crushing it. We're doing the best we can. And with each
100%.
generation, it'll just get better and better, which is so exciting, in my opinion.
It's so exciting. And we have no idea where this world is going to go. But I really do hold a lot of optimism for the vibration being raised little by little.
Exactly. Yes. I'm quickly interrupting this wonderful conversation to invite you, if you have any curiosity about your human design and how you can apply it to your life to create more ease and flow and alignment, head over to my website. It is www.daynafaye.com. That's DAYNAFAYE.com. Book a human design reading. It is 90 minutes long over Zoom. We go deep into uncovering your human design and applying it to your life in real time. At the end, you'll receive the recording and a robust document to go with it. So as we talk about people pleasing, I have to confess, I still get very, very nervous in regards to confrontation. Like I do choose to avoid it, and I know this is an issue for me. Do you have any examples from any of your clients that you've been working with who are adults and, into their life and trying to unpack this and transmute it?
I have a very interesting example just from this morning. I was working with a woman who, throughout her childhood, her parent, her primary caregiver, was very controlling, hyper controlling, and chose what this person wore, chose everything basically for them. And my client was a people pleaser because love for her was conditional to how compliant she would be with this hyper controlling parent figure. And it worked for years until, maybe she was 22 or so. And then what started to happen is it's very interesting. I really think that people pleasing is often held in our throats because we're not saying what needs to be said. And so my client will grab her chest, like hold her chest and hold her throat and be like, I feel a lot of tension here. And what started to happen is that she would actually get heart flutters when there were boundaries that weren't being set in her life. And it became out of control. So she has this somatic expression when she is not setting firm boundaries in her life. She gets heart flutters.
Wow, that's so cool that you uncovered what specifically happens for her. And I'm sure that will resonate with other people as well. And that is, I was going to ask you about boundaries because that coincides with people pleasing is you're not setting a boundary.
It's so hard for people once they've been a people pleaser for decades, because what happens over time is that you actually lose track, you suppress what you want in a situation. So this could be very benign to a person that's in a friend group that's like, I'll just do whatever you guys want to do. Let's just order whatever you all want to order. Like that we all know that person who's like, whatever. And that can be wonderful. Dayna's like, that's me. And it can be me too, 100%. Just wanting to allow the people to have a really strong opinion to get their needs met. But over time, what happens is that we actually are cutting ourselves off from our intuition. And that's not usually something that people want to do. A lot of people who are spiritually inclined, who are also people pleasers, like what we're doing is cutting ourselves off from our chi, our life force energy, our shakti, our ability to recognize what it is that we want. Our creative spirit wants to create and do in the world. That doesn't mean we need to bulldoze everyone in our lives. But if we've been catering to other people for so long, once we actually carve out the space to be like, well, what do I want? That voice might be very, very quiet and difficult to hear.
So would you suggest some somatic practices to help with that?
It's so interesting. And I feel like the path is I could give like a menu of items, but I think every single person has their own path to healing the people pleaser tendency. Somatic practices can certainly be really useful. I think that like yelling and is so interesting. When I was healing my throat chakra, I played the saxophone a lot and I was singing a lot and I was singing in the shower. And sometimes it's just like moving the energy that's there. That could be really useful. Sometimes tapping into sacred anger as well. When we've been people pleasing for so long, we've actually been usually allowing people to just kind of walk all over us, and having the right amount of anger to be like, hey, actually, that's not okay. What you did can be really healing for people to recreate the boundary between other people and themselves.
Yeah, I have that experience with realizing that I was suppressing healthy anger, like you said, like just not even, I must have had the programming when I was younger of you can't be angry, that's, or else you'll get in trouble. And my root center is defined to my emotional center. So I have the pressure to emote all the time.
honestly such a cosmic joke every time people look at their human design charts. Usually their childhood was not set up entirely for them to be in the fullness, the brilliance of their gifts. And so it's this interesting hero's journey. Like, Dayna, you have so much energy to emote and share and express. And how interesting that you were born into the family you were born into. And this is your path to reclaim your voice through this podcast and elsewhere.
It's the school of Earth school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say that this could be a blanket statement, so please correct me, people pleasing happens more often for women?
Gender is very interesting. I would say that traditionally, yes. And the reason why is that many women on our planet are conditioned to cater, to serve. There are subliminal and very overt messages of the patriarchy and looking at masculine qualities as better than. And so a lot of women are attempting to fit into those more masculine roles by means of getting ahead or moving forward. And yeah, I'm curious how that lands for you, Dayna, as a woman.
Yeah, I was reflecting on it before we met today, and I connect safety with it. You know, women become people pleasers because it's safer. And my experience is I started working at a golf course as a beverage cart and bartender person at like 16 years old already. And the hospitality industry at that time was flirt back with the male customers, give it to them because they'll tip you more. And sure enough, there was my reward was they would say something kind of at
Off
that time
color.
it was, yes, at that time though it was normal, which is so motivating. I mean, that was only, I don't know, how old am I now? 20 years ago. I mean, that wasn't that long ago that was totally acceptable in where I was living to receive that kind of treatment and to realize that I could, my gate 39.55, I could provoke them back and receive a lot of money from that and better shifts. And I was rewarded for being pretty and listening and serving. And I also was more safe. And so I just think about a lot of the roles that women play, even if they're a stay-at-home mom, you know, they're keeping the peace of the house. That traditional job is what they're meant to do. So for all the roles that we play, yeah, it just seems like, ooh, this might be a little more common for women versus a male who grew up in a society where he did feel really safe to exert himself, to feel angry, to be competitive, all those masculine qualities.
Totally. Yeah. And I just like have so much compassion for the part of you that was like, I know what I need to do to basically survive and do well here. And that is to deny my own self and my needs and just kind of cater. I also really want to mention that people pleasing can be life-saving for people who are in physically, emotionally, or verbally abusive situations. And it really can keep people safe when those situations get really scary. And I work with parts work, which is this idea that we are all many parts. If you want to look at it through a human design lens, Dayna, you're a 2-4, you're also a manifesting generator. Like, there are all these different parts of who you are. And the idea with parts work is that there are no bad parts. Every single part, there might be maladaptive parts that are no longer serving you, but they all at one point were attempting to keep you safe and attempting to get you love. And so when we talk about people pleasing, I don't want to cast it aside as like this horrible villain that we're trying to do away with entirely. Like, sometimes having people pleasing is actually like a survival tactic to get through whatever situation that you're in. I have a client right now that is in a non-abusive relationship, but her partner will get very big. When she tries to assert her needs, he will get very scary and his voice will grow very loud, and he, like, his body and his posture gets very big. And I do think in this scenario, this is what the dynamic, the gender dynamic that you're speaking to, that she will then get small again because it's an issue of safety.
And how much of that is connected generationally too? Like, is that gentleman just getting big because that's what he saw his dad do and his grandpa? My understanding is we're holding all of that energy.
Yes. So much of the work that I do is just awakening people to the recognition that your life didn't start with you. You have eons of people before you, generations that you're not even aware of that are flowing through your body. And it's really useful, even if you don't currently have a relationship with some of your family members for safety, just to understand a bit more of like, what relay race are you running? What was your starting point with all of these things? And I very much believe in empowerment. You can choose what your life is going to look like, but it'll help make sense these moments, because I'm sure that that man in the example I just shared might feel some level of shame after that happens. And so maybe drawing awareness to the fact that his dad got really big when he got angry, and his grandfather got really big and he was actually physically violent, like, will give him a bit more insight and awareness to choose something different, to recognize how much has been sort of passed down and where he wants to take his lineage.
So what I'm hearing is the first step is awareness, and then that next step might come more naturally for him. And does it only really take that one first step to do it differently, to start breaking that pattern?
Some therapists might argue that you don't even need awareness, that sometimes you don't even need to know where it comes from in order to choose differently, or to be in the present moment and really be in the here and now. We're in the gate of the now right now. But I have a defined ajna, and the way that I work is very kind of like psychoanalytical. It's useful for me. I find it really interesting to be like, let's figure out where this came from. But not everybody needs that. I think you mentioned before somatic work. Sometimes somatic work, someone's holding, for instance, like a hip stretch. They are deeply emotional and they remember in their body what it feels like to hold fear of lack of safety in their hips. They have this cathartic release in the middle of the yoga class, and they've moved some of that stuckness and that people pleasing. I'm just sharing like a completely different way of healing. There's so many modalities and ways to work with this.
I heard recently, I think I read it in a spiritual book, that if you're alive right now, we're the first generation with the opportunity to actually have food on the table, have time to look at these generational traumas, to bring the awareness to the people pleasing. So really, it is our job to transform that. And I think in this spiritual or self-help space, sometimes you see people kind of poo-pooing it, like, geez, you're navel gazing too much. You're always looking at your inner childhood wounds. But my understanding is, well, we're the first generation that gets to do that. And we've got a whole lot in our backpack right now. And I need to lighten the load.
Totally. Yes. I think that there is a trope of millennials, like it's always something to heal. And I do think that people can get too much in the healing process, that there's always something to heal. I have actually been enjoying in my personal practice some days waking up and being like, how would I act today if I was fully healed, if I was fully whole, if I just loved myself? And I don't think that there's ever, no matter what, we will always have more. But sometimes the greatest lesson that we can learn is just the simple joy of living in our heart for an entire day.
So take that pause right after you wake up and just ask yourself, how would I feel if I was fully healed?
Totally.
I love that. And I do have an example actually of a couple of days ago, I went and did a steam shower. And I actually had, so interesting, we're in the gate of the now right now, which is in the throat center. I started a sore throat on May 10th, which is when the sun started being in the throat center. And it lasted a really long time. We even had to reschedule this podcast. And you had even said to me, oh, maybe you need to get some anger out. And I didn't really do a whole lot of self-reflection because I didn't have the energy for it. But I went into a steam shower the other day, and something about sitting there with no stimulation and having the steam fog up the shower so I couldn't see, I just felt a wave of grief. I just felt sorrow, and I just let it out. And I actually didn't, I love, just like you, I love nerding out about where did this come from and, what am I healing right now? But it was such a release, and I didn't care where it came from. I had ideas of where it came from, but I knew, wow, this is what I need to be doing more of. And that is moving this energy that I'm holding on to in my body, like an animal, shaking it out.
100%. And Dayna, this is such a great point of like, you don't always need to know where it comes from. We're living in wild, turbulent times because things are changing, they're crumbling. Awarenesses are being made that were kind of suppressed for many millennia. up until this point, there's a lot of collective grief. There is a lot of grief that's been passed down through our lineage that maybe we're the most awake or aware in our family lines to finally feel. There's a lot that working as we do with people, you're working with people all day, as am I. Sometimes I'll feel a wave of something and I'm like, I don't know which client this might be from, but I'm just going to let this move. And speaking of people pleasing, I do think that working in the healing arts helps you a lot not to merge with other people's emotional experiences, to allow them to have their feelings, to really be there with them, but to know that it's not yours to feel on their behalf or yours to fix or solve or save. I think becoming a therapist has been one of the greatest gifts for my people-pleasing tendencies, because I just day in and day out sit with people in the hard stuff that you don't have to fix or save or solve.
Yes, yes. And I view the spiritual awakening as like there's different tiers to it. Like the first tier is very exciting and you have rose-colored glasses on, this new awareness. And then you start working through some hard stuff and you get knocked down a few times. And then the new awareness, like you thought you were aware 5 years ago, and then you get to a new tier of awareness. And I don't really have the rose-colored glasses on anymore. So what you're saying, I love, because I don't want, as I guide people through their human design or intuitive sessions, I don't want to do it for them. Like grabbing that badge to be like, okay, I unlocked the next course. I unlocked the next thing that I need to get into to come home to myself and to my soul. That's the journey. And it is beautiful. It is fun. I don't want to talk like it's a daunting thing. I think we would be taking away somebody's human experience if you would always be people pleasing and always holding their hands through the hard stuff.
100,000,000,000%. You can't see me right now, but I'm like snapping in yes. The spiritual perspective creates so much less of the savior complex, because you recognize that soul, that human, is so much better supported by forces unseen than we could ever be their singular support as a human healer. We're here to light the way, absolutely, but we can't carry people on our backs. And as it relates to people pleasing personally, where these are long-standing relationships that you have, where you want to keep these people in your life because they're family or friends for many years, and it's hard to have this conversation because you have no idea where it will go, to be able to have that conversation with yourself first, to be really clear, like, this is my truth. And then also to learn how to couch it in a beautiful way. I love you. And so what I'm about to say might be really hard to hear, but it's in service of our continued closeness and greater intimacy. And I want to share the story that I'm telling myself right now is this. And allowing other people to have their feelings about something that is your truth is a continued practice. I'm an open emotional center. I have all of my gates open in the solar plexus. So my people pleasing very much stems from, I would just rather not deal with the drama of knowing that I'm disappointing someone and making them angry. And yet I'm really working on this with like small social plans where I'll get to the night and I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I'll be honest with the person, like, I'm totally physically spent. I'm a projector. I don't say that, but I know my source of energy and I know where I'd push myself past my limits, which is where we started this podcast episode, in favor of just making sure that I didn't make that person sad or angry with me.
And there you were, keeping the peace. Yeah.
Having a practice where you are continuously with yourself, whether that is in the steam shower, whether that is on a walk with your dogs without screens, whether that's a morning journaling practice, whether that's meditation, being so clear and present with yourself will make it unequivocal when you are off the path with other people. It's going to feel like, whoa, I've actually left my own path and I'm on someone else's. You'll be able to know that didn't feel quite right because you're right with yourself and you have that center to return to again and again.
And thank you for suggesting that you get really clear with yourself first before you do have that conversation with that friend or person, because I confronted a friend once in my life and it backfired on me. So I would also say, take a look in the mirror, because that friend turned around and told me how she felt about me in some issues. And that was very hard to hear.
So this is an important thing too. The people pleasers, which we are all uniting in this moment, there's this question of, okay, say it goes really well and there is greater intimacy created through that moment of hard conversation. But what if that person explodes? What if they react exactly the way that they have your whole childhood and it becomes really dramatic and yada yada? And it is an art form to figure out, how do I have that person in my life? Some people you can't cut out of your life, or you don't want to for the sake of your own sanity, because sometimes emotional cutoff is the more painful option. But really finding where things, like you're kind of like titrating and figuring out and experimenting with where the line is for you that will feel best.
And we started this conversation talking about human design. Are there specific areas in the chart for the listeners that would show them that they have a more tendency to be a people pleaser?
You know, I'm like fast tracking through every single like energy type profile, and I actually think that people pleasing can come up pretty much anywhere. Like, let's take a manifestor, for instance. You'd think manifestors, these catalyzers, these initiators, these powerful beings would not people please, but that's actually a hallmark of a conditioned manifestor, is making themselves more palatable and people pleasing so that they don't rock the boat. I know many manifestors before they stepped into their full power where they're like, I was completely defaulting to other people and denying my manifestor urge to make waves. You know, from a center perspective, we talked about two of them, the solar plexus and the heart centers. The heart is, how do I prove my worth to other people, which I think is more about external validation within oneself. But I think the solar plexus is about keeping the peace a lot, saying, I can sense other people's feelings and I'm trying to not rock the boat. You have a defined solar plexus, so there are many other places that could happen. I would say having both of your mind centers undefined, sensing people's certainty and being like, well, it's easier to go with their certainty, so I'm just going to hop on that bandwagon and that ideology, and it's easier to just go there instead of being in the uncertainty.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking of my mom with her undefined solar plexus and being like scared of me. She said I would get over things quickly, but I would get mad, or I would be so happy she couldn't handle it. She's like, you were all over the place. Her poor undefined solar plexus.
Right. But those parents with the undefined solar plexus, like, you get to be along for the ride. And it's the best lesson of no emotion is forever. No, nothing is forever. And so if you allow people, especially children who are not conditioned yet, to just move through it. For instance, your mom setting a boundary, you cannot get this hyper sugary cereal and you're having a meltdown in the middle of the aisle and freaking out. And your mom's like, I love you so much. I know this is a lot for you right now. I know you're really disappointed and I totally see you. And also you can't get this sugary cereal. Like, it will pass. It did pass.
And being a parent with a toddler is such great training for that.
Oh, I just want to like send some love to Mia. She is so, you two are just the dynamic duo. MG's emotional.
She was kind of part of our human design training because she was a baby at the time. And so she would be like in the background of our videos. So when I go back and study and I hear you say, Mia, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful.
It's actually so special because I feel like you probably have limited like ways to capture that time in video. Like, that's so cool.
It really is. It's very cool. Nadia, thank you so much for being on today and for sharing your wisdom from your personal experience, from a human design standpoint, from a therapeutic lens on people pleasing. I'm so excited I just feel like such a human design nerd lately, and I love teaching it, but really, I want people to really bring the awareness to what is the conditioning that's actually going on here and how can human design empower them to do that. So any last words or anything on your heart for the listeners?
I think the last thing that's coming up for me is this question that people might have if they're stuck in patterns of people pleasing. Like, this works. This is working for me. It will until it doesn't. And so you get to choose if you're going to wait until your car breaks down on the side of the road and you have to call AAA, which is basically like therapy or somatic practices, like where things get really hard, where your car basically grinds to a halt to make changes, or if you're going to start making subtle changes now. If you can start, doing some ongoing maintenance to your vehicle and recognizing where you get off track and tuning up the engine so that you can really listen to yourself. It can feel really hard for people that are in relationships where they have learned, like, this person is relying on me to show up in this specific way, to not have needs and to always be at their beck and call, for instance. And so those small, subtle shifts energetically in how you people please will make huge differences in your life. I think of like a ship that just changes where they're going by 1 degree, ends up at a completely different place down the line. So small, sweet shifts in your life, or don't take my word for it, it will catch up to you eventually. And you will get to a point where it's too much and your body will say, enough is enough.
Thank you for that motivation. And while you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, if you're just getting started, maybe practicing on a relationship that isn't quite so close or as big, so that you can practice on just that, the friend from high school first or whatever that is, and then your more intimate relationships after that.
Yeah. And even starting to realize, like, people say, oh, I feel anxious, like I have anxiety. Sometimes that can stem from people pleasing because it's the hypervigilance of I need to be on alert, of realizing like something could happen at any moment and I need to be the one that makes sure that the person doesn't explode. And depression also can happen from unfelt feelings of your own that get stuck in place, and then your whole life force energy depresses into itself. Depression very much could come from a pattern of people pleasing, of making yourself so small, your needs so small that your life force energy is diminished. The goal of all of this, to have the hard conversations, to take up space, to have your needs met, is so that you can feel the most vibrant version of yourself. And Dayna, you are a wonderful example of this for people listening who love this show. You are no one told you start the Ordinary Magic podcast. You are unleashing your voice, you're taking up space, and you're doing what you love to do. And that energy you can feel. Your energy is so vibrant and so palpable.
Thank you so much. And I did seek support when I needed it. I found you as a coach. I have, friends who have helped. It was kind of the cars breaking down situation. I need to express myself. And little by little, those small steps have gotten me here to Ordinary Magic. And thank you, Nadia, for being part of that puzzle that came together. It's super special.
I'm so happy to be in each other's orbits, Dayna. I learned so much from you. I'm so inspired by you. I'm so grateful to know you.
Thank you. And lastly, where can people find you? What are you working on right now? Or what is it that you would like to share in regards to your work?
Where my love is taking me right now is individual and couples therapy. And so my private practice is nearly full, but I have the space for a couple more clients. If you are looking to work with someone to address people pleasing, if you want to work on an individual basis, or couples work is like it's like chef's kiss. It's the best to find out how this dynamic that's at play in your partnership, maybe your parents, maybe you're not, but in your partnership, how you can actually balance the scales of one person that's making themselves really small and one person that's taking up a lot of the space, or vice versa. I would love to work with you.
I have no doubt you are so great at couples sessions. I have been so fortunate to work with you as a coach, but in this past year, I've also worked with you as a therapist. So I've got to watch your journey. And I've worked with a lot of therapists, talk therapy in the past. And Nadia, you are my favorite. You are to me, you're like textbook. You follow all the rules and you have your intuitive side, and you really empower me as the client to come up with the answers. You're not feeding it to me. And you leave the session with me, like we summarize it at the end and you say, what are you leaving with? And I've never had a therapist do that before. It's so profound to me. I highly, highly recommend Nadia and her therapy work. It's absolutely amazing. And please go check out Moonrise as well. It's such a beautiful community. I have attended one of their new moon circles and it was so much fun. So check out all their offerings on Instagram. And thank you so much, Nadia.
Thank you, Dayna. You're the best.
Ordinary Magic is a Lit Path Studios production, produced by Jamie Gale and Dayna Faye. Music is by Shane Ivers. Until next time, I wish you many powerful moments of ordinary magic.